Good afternoon and welcome to the third and last session of today's Interact Global, the free virtual edition of Momenta's Interact conference. Hello, if it's your first session, or welcome back if you've been watching sessions of the last 4 days. Today's talks are about innovation and creativity. We already had two very inspiring sessions today from Momenta's own principal UX designer and illustrator, Emily Trotter, talking about designs of illustration in experience design, and Lisa Reeves, user experience domain lead at HSBC, about Agile UX and the design thinking model. If you haven't been able to join these sessions, you will find them on YouTube channel later in the week. Before we start, please to get involved and say hello to each other in the chat. Make sure you switch your chat settings to panelists and attendees so everyone can see your messages. And do let us know if there are any audio issues or any issues with the stream, and we'll try to get these fixed as soon as possible. We are also using auto-captured generated captions for this session. Some of these may not be 100% accurate. However, when we start and when we share the talk publicly on our YouTube channels, we will ensure the transcripts are accurate. Now, we're really excited for our third and last talk of today. This co-presentation is about Forget the Trail of Breadcrumbs from Liz Hubert and Diana Sonis, both co-founder at CX by Design. Liz and Diana have explored navigational structures across different industries and across a range of various tech platforms. Lately, they have been experimenting with a method of creating navigational structures that translate in-person human interactions to online domains. In this session today, they will share why people don't care much about perfectly structured hierarchy of information and why navigation needs to evolve to more closely reflect customers' intentions for being on a platform in the first place. Then they will hold an extended conversation how to make this vision reality. Please do ask a lot of questions using the Q&A box. I will be asking these to Liz and Diana at the end, and we'll try to get through as many as we can. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to Liz and Diana. Thank you and enjoy.
Thanks, Manuela, and thanks, Momenta, for having us. I am going to switch my video off while we do the presentation, and I'll switch it back on during the Q&A session. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you making the time. So a little bit about us before we get started. I am Diana, and with my business partner, Liz Hubert, we are co-founders of CX by Design. We are a human-centered consulting firm that takes a data-driven approach to designing products, services, and systems. So human-centered is a really fancy way, as you all probably know, it's basically of saying that we put customers' needs first in our design decisions. So you probably read our bios, and Manuela did a great job introducing us, so I won't bore you with the fascinating details of our careers, but please do look us up on our website, cxby.design, and connect with us on LinkedIn as well. We love having conversations with smart and curious people. So the short story is that we are longtime practitioners of UX design, and within that, our specialty is information architecture. Obviously, that includes navigation, which is what we're here to talk about today. So what is the next hour going to look like? We're going to talk a little bit about navigational structures as they are today. And then our method for rethinking navigation, which we call the customer intentions method, and give you a few real world examples of what a customer intentions method might look like. And really the bulk of it, we'd love for you to ask questions. So we do have an extended, almost fireside chat kind of Q&A session at the end of this. So please do ask questions. We'd love the chat format. Okay, so let's dive right in. When we consider navigation as it is today, we can see that enterprises often have a simplistic understanding of navigational structures in UX design. Companies often shy away from messing with known organizational schemas for fear that their users or customers will become confused and basically run away. There's some truth to that in terms of sticking to a general known framework of functional elements on a site. The proverbial cart in the upper right-hand corner is probably the best example. Moving it elsewhere serves no real purpose. However, what about the rest of navigation? the organization of content usually goes one of two ways. Either it reflects kind of this hierarchical, department-based, or brand-heavy organization, and businesses seem to think that users or customers don't get confused by that, which of course isn't the case. The other way content is often displayed is through a very top-heavy theme, loosely based on general product themes, kind of like Amazon. So looking at these examples here, we can see Amazon on the left-hand side with products organized according to themes. So these themes are an interesting mix of single categories and lots of double categories. If you'll see all the N's or ampersands there, you'll see the double categories. Will the user find their way? Probably. Is it a heavier cognitive load for the user to assess the categories before diving into each one? Very likely. The other example we have here is COSTCO. It's a great example. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, COSTCO is a big retail store that sells just about anything and everything you may want to buy in bulk quantities. It's a membership-based model where an annual fee gets you access to buy packs of, let's say, 15 tomatoes at a time versus the 2 or 3 you'd normally buy at a grocery store. So you can see from this screenshot that their top-level navigation reflects how the company sees itself rather than how customers are likely to search for information. So for example, what are services exactly? Are photos and optical not services? Once you start drilling down into any one of these, it becomes even more confusing. And looking at our last 2 examples here, Columbia's Teachers College and Harvard Business Review, we can see that top-down hierarchical navigation style rules. And while it's important to orient the user, this isn't the only way users should be navigating through the site. In fact, it probably shouldn't even be the primary way users are navigating through the site. And another point to make here is, besides thinking about the actual organizational structure, we also know that a user must have some guideposts to retrace their steps if lost. The fact that users can get lost is, of course, one issue, but looking beyond that topic, the guideposts many systems currently have are what we know as breadcrumbs. We've often talked about leaving a trail of breadcrumbs in our past presentations when talking about navigation. And what that really means is allowing the user to navigate by backtracking either their steps on a site or cognitively through the company's hierarchy. But if you've ever come across breadcrumbs online, you know it can be cumbersome to retrace steps this way or click the browser back like a pigeon foraging for food. So taking all of this into account, we got to thinking, how could we help users never actually be lost? How could we make navigating more human and less Dewey Decimal? This led us to asking, what if a navigational structure could change to fit a user's intentions at any moment, at any place? What if a user could transport at any point of the website or product from their current location based on their intention or need? Kind of like Harry Potter was able to apparate himself to Diagon Alley. So to do this, a proposed navigational structure would have to first understand what the user intends to do at all times, wherever they are on the site, and be flexible enough to transport the user to any place in the software based on the current user intention. But before we discuss these 2 requirements, let's see what we mean by user intention. Let's define that. So just to give you a bit of context, we've worked in many different industries, from financial services to e-commerce to consumer packaged goods, and across a range of tech platforms. So from enterprise apps to website redesigns to native mobile applications. And over the years of actually observing people navigating various online platforms, we've realized that people don't care as much about perfectly structured hierarchy of information as they care about themselves. So more precisely, what they care about is their specific reason for being on a platform in the first place. Basically, their why for being there. And that is what we define as their intention. It's pretty much the only thing they're thinking about. So let's unpack that a little bit. As UX people, we tend to gather user or customer data before we design anything, right? I mean, most of us, that's the perfect kind of engagement or project. So for this particular example, let's pretend a person is shopping for cycling gear on an e-commerce site. A lot of the time, qualitative data is made up of a bunch of statements like this one here. If I want to understand what I need for my cycling trip this winter, I'll talk to my local cycling buddies about with more experience to find out what they use. Likely, after any research effort, you'll have a bunch of statements like these. So you can go ahead and break down each statement to its basics of when, how, why, what, etc. And from that, generate a list of customer intentions. So for this specific example, if we break down this statement here, our customer intentions will be twofold. So the first one would be to investigate and research a better cycling solution. And then the second one would be to get my question answered about a cycling solution or a product. So you can see that the when and how are transformed into statement 1, while the why is translated into statement 2. So, and then the other point to make here is that customer statements can be translated to multiple customer intentions. So one to many is possible. This process of generating customer intentions from research is an analysis exercise that allows us as designers to build navigational structures that help customers fulfill their intentions anywhere on the site. And when the business is concerned with helping customers fulfill their intentions online, we quickly realize that the way we visualize customers navigating our sites today is really unrealistic. Let me show you why. Here we have a couple of diagrams representing people navigating software applications or websites. The hexagons represent a place on a website or an app. This might be a page or a view. The person in the middle of the hexagon has several paths. In an application or on a website, these would be links. So there are several paths that a person can take to get to the next place. So here on the left-hand side, we see an example of a customer path often defined on software projects. If you've ever been on a software project before, and I'm assuming that most of you here have been on software projects before, you'll recognize this as the happy path. In this example, we assume the user has a singular task, and once they start down a path, the user is completely focused on his or her task. There are no distractions, questions, or thoughts that the user has on this path. Navigations built this way are very linear to ensure the customer is forced to this happy path. Unfortunately, this method really misses the mark in real life. And we all know that we're not designing utopia here. So to a customer, limiting path options to a very linear happy path thinking only feels more like a business is telling them what they should, where they should go, and less like the business supporting them in where they intend or want to go. So if we talk about psychology, this style of navigation can decrease a user's intrinsic motivation. And in case you're not familiar with the term, intrinsic motivation is a person wanting to do something without any obvious external rewards. So forced linear navigation decreases intrinsic motivation, and it does so by decreasing two key things. The first one is competence, or as we would define that, the desire to control or master whatever online environment you're in and its outcome. And the second one is autonomy, or the desire for exercising your free will. Now let's look at the right-hand hexagon diagram, the more realistic path. In this example, a user walks through a happy path door, but then decides to take a right for whatever reason, it doesn't matter. Immediately, their environment shifts to support them in meeting their intention. By taking a right, the user has given the system a clue about their intention for visiting. With the more realistic path, it doesn't matter if they stay on the happy path or not. The navigational path shapeshifts almost and customizes to their actions. So there are no navigational quote unquote mistakes to recover from. So this idea of a digital ecosystem taking into account what you're selecting and cultivating your interface based on that increases competence and autonomy together. And that increases intrinsic motivation. The other benefit of increased intrinsic motivation is that it makes people happy, and happy people often turn into loyal customers. Obviously, we want our software built on psychological principles that cater to the needs of customers if we really want to build loyalty and long-term value. So in this way, we would empower customers on whatever digital property you're working on. And quite frankly, they have to enjoy being there, right? So our hypothesis with this is that if we design digital navigation structures that empower the right side of this diagram, the more realistic path, we'd be on our way to creating that human, organic conversation and empowering customers to fulfill their intentions in whatever digital property they are. So I've talked enough. So I'm going to pass the baton to Liz now, my business partner, and she'll take you through what we mean by organic conversation, as well as some concrete examples of intent-based navigation.
So hello, everyone, and good afternoon. Taking it from where Diana wonderfully left off. So this organic conversation, it's a bridge of understanding between the customer and a business within the digital medium where the two are meeting. So it's a conversation that flows naturally between human and business information, just as it would between two friends. So how does intent-based navigation fit in here? Think of it like this. If fostering organic conversations online between our customers and our digital properties is the goal for a business, which we would argue it should be, then intent-based navigation is the structure to get the job done. To get there, though, we must understand, document, and design from the viewpoint of what customers intend to do when interacting with our digital mediums, rather than cataloging and rearranging the content businesses currently have in order to make that content more user-friendly. So what does this mean, practically speaking? Well, we can loosely think of it as a four-step process that involves first redefining how you think about website navigation, then understanding your customers' intentions. Next, you would model and design an ecosystem that combines hierarchical and this lateral or intentions-based navigation. And finally, you'd put a system of governance in place to create, maintain, and update your ecosystem based on this intersection of customer intentions and business values or goals. The resulting structure decreases the amount of navigation and content that customers need to consume to meet their intentions. And the result is a decreased cognitive load for our customers with an increased success rate in goal fulfillment when interacting with our business. The net outcome is a delightful customer experience that sets a business apart from the competition. Over time, this creates happy, loyal customers while saving businesses money and resources in the process. So imagine it like this. Imagine wandering around a well-designed home. Rarely do you have a need to go back to the front door to find the pantry or the bathroom from, let's say, the living room or the dining room. And this is because there are well-designed ways to take you to the right room at the right time. Similarly, there is no reason to force the user on our digital properties to retrace their steps in an effort to move forward to meet their goals. If we think about navigation as this organic conversation between the digital property and the customer or the user, it takes on a new meaning. It's no longer just a well-organized hierarchy of content or themes, but it's a lateral intentions-based structure that shifts to accommodate user intentions in the moment. So let's look at a few examples. First up, we have Patagonia. And this is what you're seeing on the left-hand side of the page is a snippet of their product page, of an individual products page. So after all of the expected product information, we see here that there are doorways into learning how and where the item is made. Given the well-documented eco-consciousness of Patagonia customers, it's likely that one of their customers' intentions, one of the customer intentions is, when I purchase a product, I want to ensure or learn about how it's made. Patagonia was started on the premises of and intentionally appeals to customers' minimalist or sustainable ethos. So to satisfy their customers' intent to discover the environmental impact of the goods that they're looking to purchase, the navigational structure of the page includes this impact section. And you can see this here outlined in red on the bottom left of the screen. And this section details fair trade information. It has different modules for materials like recycled polyester. I know it's a bit hard to read, but on the lower left, but each of those kind of gray rectangles lead to this deeper dive into more information. And then on the right, if you want to read even more about fair trade or recycled polyester, they have that information and you can click into it. And this is the idea of the lateral intent-based navigation that we're talking about. This reinforces the customer's perception that the business understands them. And it in turn leads to increased customer feelings of autonomy and competence regarding their purchasing. And therefore, it leads to higher purchase rates and increased loyalty. Another example is a US-based hunting gear business called Sitka. This is one of the companies we've worked with to put our intent-based navigation ideas to use. You can see here along this dotted line that the list of customer intentions includes things like buying an item, staying up to date, understanding what the business does or what it makes, etc. This is also a kind of split up screenshot of an individual product page. And on the left here, you could see how the information customers need to meet their priority intention of buying an item dominates the top of the page. But below that information, customers can easily either meet some of their other intentions, like staying up to date on the gear or understanding what the business does and makes with the why we made this module up here on the right. Fulfilling these intentions is what an in-store sales representative can do with organic in-person conversation. And now this site is structured to do the same thing. We've had hierarchical and lateral navigation for a long time on the web, but in defining these navigation pieces based on intentions, every link or piece of content has a mountain of rationality and purpose behind it. So we've looked at two e-commerce examples. Now let's look at a more of a task-based application example to see how intent-based navigation works there. If you're not familiar with Asana, which is what we're looking at here, it's a web and mobile application designed to help teams organize, track, and manage their work. One can assume that a customer intention for using this tool is completing tasks in order to meet project deadlines. What we see in this screenshot specifically is the detail of a task in Asana. And you can see how Asana uses intent-based or lateral navigation by allowing its users to easily connect other tasks that are dependent on this one. So ones that are either blocking this one from starting, or ones that this task may be also blocking from starting. And you can also see the people responsible for making sure this task gets completed. And finally, you can see conversations with people to whom the task is relevant. All of these help customers meet their main intention of getting tasks done. And I can click into these relevant tasks or into Diana's list of tasks that she's working on, or see what Liz is saying. So it's all kind of apparating me across the app in order to make sure I meet my intentions. The relevant point here is that Asana allows the user to access all these necessary functions without having to go back to the main dashboard. The application, the app has avenues. Well, it understands what the user intends to do within the specific task and serves up paths to fulfill these intentions with appropriate functionality. Hierarchical-based navigation is still available, should someone need it. There is still a hamburger menu here in the upper left side. However, this lateral intent-based navigation makes things easier and more intuitive for the user. Sites and applications like the examples we just showed are now set up like a well-designed home or building. One doesn't have to find their way back through a trail of breadcrumbs or navigation hierarchy in order to move forward to meet their goals. Instead, the customer can fulfill or progress their intentions from relevant places within the site or application. So hopefully by now you get why creating intentions-based navigation is a good idea if we want to align our software navigational structures with our users' expectations. Simply put, users expect digital products to understand them as other humans do, and we must innovate to fulfill and eventually exceed these expectations. So if we imagine that, say, 70 to 80% of all users fall in one of two categories, either they are people with a singular goal who know what they want, or they are explorers who meander and delight in the discovery. The typical solution that most businesses have been relying on with breadcrumbs or navigation structures is forcing both types of users to retrace their steps back to where they started. But we believe users expect technology to understand what they want, which really means people expect the business to magically guess their intentions and help them transport to wherever they need to go to fulfill these intentions. Designing intentions-based navigation structures helps with this because customers feel good that businesses understand them, while businesses are better served when users dive deeper into their online ecosystems or in their software through continuously fulfilling or progressing at fulfilling their intentions. Going a step further, we've observed that intentional navigational design also serves the business because it empowers users to feel autonomous and competent in using the site or service. They become loyal customers and users who are intrinsically motivated from the core of their being to return to this business again and again. And tracking user navigational patterns allows the business to learn more about the users, which in turn allows them to provide better services and products. So let's wrap up. What did we learn so far today? Mainly that designing for customer intentions decreases the amount of information that the customer needs to consume, which decreases their cognitive load, increases their success rate of fulfilling their goals or intentions, and improves the overall positive perception of their experience with a business. Over time, this creates happy, loyal customers, and it also ensures that people don't get lost using our software in the first place. The key takeaway here is serving up the right content at the right moment to meet or exceed users' goals and expectations serves both the user and the business in a more thoughtful and profitable way. UX designers, we create impactful spaces that sit comfortably at the intersection of business, technology, and design by creating flexible, adaptable navigational structures around well-defined user intentions. This helps us create and retain loyal customers, which is a win-win for everybody. Now, of course, designing for customer intentions is not the only way to evolve the design of digital product navigation. For example, there are plenty of articles written about jobs to be done and other methods, and we encourage everyone to research these methods and develop your own viewpoint on how to evolve your practice. But the main idea here is to evolve or risk losing your users to other, more intentional competitors. So with that, let's open it up for questions and discussions.
Thanks for that, Lisa and Diana. Very, very insightful presentation. I already see that there came in a couple of questions, but I also do have a questions of my own. Working in the past and also working in big corporate companies. So there's always like in the beginning when you start like a re-navigation project, it's, yeah, we want to have the customer at the center and it's always the intention, you know, follow customers' need. But then at the end, you end up in the politicals because then you have the different departments, different interests. So when you work with companies, how do you go about that?
And just to make sure that we're understanding your question, basically, how do we navigate the politics that eventually have created all of the navigation structures we just told everybody were not helpful?
Exactly.
It's tricky. I mean, to be fully honest, it's something that we are also still experimenting with. But I think one of the main points, and I think attendees have seen this throughout this presentation, is we constantly bring it back to the business case. we are business people, of course, as well, but we also, one of our passions is that we want businesses to provide value for customers, and customers to continue to do business with businesses that they find inspiring or that meet their morals and values. And so we have learned early in our careers as UX designers that as much as we are the user advocates, when we're in these political meetings, though the people that we're working with in these companies are also our users, like CX by Design's users. And so we cultivate the conversation to meet their intentions, which are to meet their business goals, to make sure that they get promoted if they're managed, to make sure that their employees do well. And so we're taking all of that into account when we're having even these simple conversations around the navigation. And so I guess that's the short way to answer that is we cultivate our language around helping the business people to meet their intentions while helping customers meet business and their intentions, all in the pursuit of more profit or gain for the business in a ethical way.
The one thing I'll add to that is that we actually have an article coming out in a couple of weeks specifically on this subject, because this is not the first time we've been asked that question, and it's really just an educational journey, right, for us. It doesn't matter if you're a consultant or if you work within a company, it's always an educational journey, right? So no method can be force-fed to anybody. So we take our time, and they ask a lot of questions, and as long as Liz said, we can make a business case and the rationale behind it, I think that people are willing to listen when you tell them that we are building a navigation that will allow their customers more easily fulfill their needs on their site or their product.
Thank you. I got another question from Catherine. Icon must first and foremost communicate meaning. Do you have advice on using icons in navigation?
Well, I think go for it.
Oh, you go for it. Go for it, Liz.
Well, I was going to say, I think ultimately, the icons in navigation, I think, like you're saying, they ultimately need to convey some sort of meaning. And I think what helps a lot with selecting the right output to communicate that meaning is to understand the meaning of the navigational piece. I know that sounds kind of like some sort of philosophical quandary, but what we try to do in our practice is have so much rationality and so much understanding of the groupings, if we so have them, or how the site is structured both hierarchically or linear, laterally, that it helps us to make sure that if the designer was to use icons in the navigation, we can give a very good specific description of what that icon needs to portray. And I think ensuring that any sort of visual that you use in navigation ties very tightly to the meaning that you've been cultivating is by far the most important piece of that. And it's key then to have just a very solid meaning behind each navigational element.
Cool, thank you. We got a question from Anonymous. When you say lateral navigation, how is this different to linear navigation?
I'm going to let you answer that one, Liz. It's your favorite question.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So, and it may help us to update our own speaking of this, but when we say lateral navigation, we're talking about really jumping, I'm using so many like real life words, but moving from one page to another, or moving from, like if I'm reading an article on BBC, for example, and I click the link to read somebody's profile on Wikipedia, That to us is a lateral style of navigation because it's moving from within a page to within another page kind of deal. Whereas linear navigation is something that we use to describe much more of like a process flow. So like a checkout flow is a great example of what we would describe as linear navigation, where there's a progress bar at the top and I'm going from one step to the next to the next. But if you have thoughts on how better to describe those types of navigation, we would love to hear them.
And I'm sure people can reach out via LinkedIn or on Twitter to you guys.
Yes, and or there are email on the page as well. So feel free to reach out to us anytime.
Thank you. Claire is asking, what do you see as the top benefits for using voice user interfaces in the way people navigate? For example, no use of fingers needed, etc.
Benefits. Well, I think, did you want to go for this one? Sorry, I always cut you off. It's a thing I do.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think the main benefits that we've always, well, at least that I've seen, you know, Diana, if you have some magical other one that we haven't talked about, you say it, but the main benefits really are not having to use a physical input. But of course, that benefit can be outweighed with the VUI not being well designed and thought through. So I think the method that we're talking about here with customer intentions, again, it goes back to the icon question. We're kind of saying before we even decide which medium through which to show or to showcase our navigation, we first have to define those hexagons and what's on each side of that hexagon so tightly so that when we go into a VUI, we know what to call it, we know what commands will come into it, we know where it should lead, or if we do an icon, we know which one to pick, we know where it should go. So I think, you know, to answer the question, the top benefits are that it's voice versus, you know, tactile. But I think even before we get to using it, we need to really think through each and every portion of that VUI.
I mean, yeah, that's where I was going with this. I think that what we are talking about here is comes way before icons or any kind of almost design elements, where we're talking about structuring content on in a product on the internet, right? In a product or a website, and the intentions, identifying the intentions of a customer is almost an analysis step of customer or user research. So it would be, you know, way before the kind of the design elements that would come in afterwards, and all like the VUI or the icons or any kind of wireframes or any kind of design elements will come after you've defined all the user intentions or the need, you know, the needs of your customers.
So the next question is quite a lengthy one. Hopefully I'll get across to you. Would you advocate using questions at the start of a user journey to help direct the user and for us to identify the intention need? Or is this an example of how you're saying we shouldn't decrease autonomy by forcing a single route? We are trying to reduce overwhelm on our complex website, and questions was one way we thought of narrowing content on display and helping the users.
I love this question. I'm like, I'm excited for this question. I've been waiting for, as much as we've presented about this method, I've been waiting for a question like this. So thank you, anonymous attendee, for asking this question. I would be interested to know further the industry or type of website you're talking about at some point. But you know, obviously, share that if and when you're ready. But I think the reason I love this question so much is because when we were first considering the customer intentions method, it was these types of conversations that really help to bridge the gap between like the hierarchical navigation and the customer intentions method. And so as we were kind of ideating several years ago now on how we can understand, you all saw that hexagon image. And as you're asking about, it's like, how can we understand or guess in a useful way which way a user wants to go? Like, what are they here to do? What's their intentions? Like, how can we even figure that out? I think that I would love to say that I have like a specific yes, no answer to your question. But the reason I asked about your industry or the type of website is because, and I see another question about actually like implementing this, which I still want to answer, give both of us a chance to answer. But one of the ways that we implement intentions is not necessarily full stop, like the entire package from start to finish on every project. So we try to find these ways to experiment within projects in a useful way, in a way that provides value. And I think that potentially using questions at the start of a user journey might be a way for you to start to experiment and start to kind of collect user intentions if you can't, let's say, do a bigger research project, or if you don't have the budget or the scope to redesign every page to have this beautiful Harry Potter apparition navigation. So it could be a good way of gathering that data. But to your point, we don't want to decrease autonomy too much by focusing the user down one path. And so I think as you're starting to explore maybe using this method, that's the questions method and the intentions method, that may be an exploration that you do, which is like, is there a way that we can use questions to decrease content, but not have the user be stuck in a path that we think they should be on? And that would be, I think, an interesting way to start to turn the tide of the navigation in your application or website.
We also know the industry now, which you ask, Liz. It's a private sector. It's a government website with hundreds of services on it. If you want to elaborate further on that.
Yeah, that's where I kind of, I don't know. That's where I assumed you were going with it, because so, and that's why another reason, even more of a reason why to smartly and intentionally think about questions. Now, the other thing you could think about is you could ideate ways that people could self-identify, and maybe that is through selecting, maybe it's not answering questions, maybe it's selecting one of 4 options. But I think that what you're basically doing is the start of using a sort of a more intentional navigation structure. And so thinking about, if I were you, I would use these either questions or statements or whatever, and draw hexagons around them, like we did in early on in the presentation. And like, where, if somebody answers this question, what might all of their intentions be? And where would they want to go next? And where would they want to go next? I think that might help you a lot in not decreasing autonomy and competence too much.
Thank you. Then we got another question. How do you implement this? Do you have any examples where you have done this?
I can come back in the presentation, if Liz, if you want to talk about Sitka, where we've actually done this.
Yeah, and Sitka was the example where we have sort of done this method from kind of start to finish. And I want to preface it by saying that we also, if you go to our website, in our ideas section, which is our blog, and in our work section, we have a few articles on like getting into the details of what the steps were in this project, which is not necessarily the focus of this talk, but that information is out there for you if you want to dive into it. But the benefit of this project that we worked on with Sitka was that we were starting from scratch, meaning they were redesigning their entire website. And they were redesigning it in such a way that they were focusing on cultivating customer loyalty. And so kind of all the stars aligned in order for us to, there had been a ton of research. We were able to look through that, comb through that research. And as Diana showed us at the beginning of the presentation, create a list of intentions. And then we were able to use that list to create information architecture and UX deliverables and kind of go from there. And those deliverables, again, we detailed them out in different articles, but they included everything from a traditional sitemap to a hexagon version of that sitemap and of the lateral navigation and differentiating that into wireframes. But to answer your question, there are other, and this goes back to the last question we had, where there are other examples of how we implement this in smaller ways, where we kind of make the work that we're doing more modular. We know not every client is going to be a total the site redesign where we can start from scratch. But what we try to do is formulate a loose list of customer intentions, and then whatever it is that we are working on, whatever part of the project, we try to infiltrate that. I'm such a military term, but infiltrate that, or spies, with the customer intentions method. So that, just like I was saying with the government website, we might just take one page and say, okay, how can we make this more intentional? And we know that it's not going to, we're not redesigning the whole page, but we're trying to, in whatever way we can, tie it back to customer intentions.
Lovely.
I think you already touched, sorry, Manuel, I think you already touched on the next question about what is the first step you take to begin defining intent-based navigational structures for products. But if we click back in the presentation, I think it's, click back actually, so that we actually go back in the presentation. There we go. Click back there we go. Yeah, so it's one of these things, right? So what is the first step you take in defining intent-based navigational structures for products? You find as many statements as you can from either whatever customer data you already have or the customer data that you are gathering, right? So you pull out as many insights as you can. And if you have no customer or user data, then use your the next best thing, right? Use your internal stakeholders who have knowledge of your customers or your users, and try to get as many customer statements like this as possible, and then break them down into the list of customer intentions that Liz was referring to earlier. And then from there, you can begin to define the structure.
Perfect, thank you. So I think we come to the last question now, which is from Neil. Isn't persistent navigation important?
It's very important. I mean, we talked about it in the beginning of this presentation, where it's not one or the other. It's not either or. I think you can have both. So I can go back. I don't know how to quickly click through this presentation without triggering all the things, but if we go back to this example here, which is Asana, it's a task-based application, as we said. So I don't know. There's not exactly persistent navigation, but there is. I mean, you have this kind of hamburger menu, and you have a persistent menu up at the top as guideposts, right? But lateral-based and intentions-based navigation, we're talking about inside kind of the task you're doing here or inside a web page. They complement each other, really, so that you don't constantly have to use one or the other. You can actually use both.
I agree 100%. And I also challenge us, this is, Diana and I do this a lot with and this is the reason we came up with this method, which is in traditional information architecture, the polar bear book, all of the things that we've read and looked at, we have relied on persistent navigation as creating a sense of place. And as Diana was saying, it's not necessarily one or the other. Like we're not necessarily saying we need to remove persistent navigation. And we're not even saying that, but I think what we are trying to put forth to the community is persistent navigation important in all the ways that we have thought of over the years, or have we been relying on it to cover up some bigger gaps in our experience? And so we wanted to, as practitioners, push ourselves to meet our passions, which are to create more human experiences in our digital properties. And so the customer intentions method is part of it is philosophically taking a different look at persistent navigation and asking ourselves, is it there to help, or is it there because our pages are not designed to help customers meet their intentions? And how can we bridge those gaps if they exist?
We have a new question coming in from Alina. Thank you for sharing. Sorry if that's a repeated question. Could you please share about some examples of well-done navigation for service, for software as a service, task-heavy product that is used by multiple user groups that can be taken as example? Thank you in advance. And then on the top of it, she's asking, in addition to the question, especially that would work for both mobile and web.
So I think we're looking at it, but go ahead.
No, that's what I was going to ask.
Yeah, so this is, sorry, do you want to answer this one? I think Asana is one task-based, heavy task-based application. It is, I don't know, is it considered software as a service? I'm guessing it is. That has multiple user groups. So you can see here, there's Diana and then there's Liz, and let's say, we could be both assigned to the task. We could both comment on the task. So they provide avenues for us to move throughout the application, not having to go back to the dashboard, not having to go back to the persistent kind of navigation that's up on top. I can click into, let's say, a task that's blocking this one and kind of transport myself into that screen if I need to, and then click back to this one and transport myself back, kind of like Harry Potter. We talked about Harry Potter apparating from place to place, instead of having to rely on either clicking the back button or, any kind of breadcrumb style navigation. And especially that would work for both mobile and web. Yeah, so Asana, for example, if you've ever used it, it works on mobile and the web pretty well. So that's a really good example if you want to, and it's free. You can download it and take a look at it and just kind of navigate throughout the application.
Right, and just to add to that, like the main points, and Diana touched on them, and we touched on them in the presentation as well. The main points here is that this type of product, navigationally, they understand what a task is and what are all the elements, what are all the hexagons that surround somebody who's in the middle of the task hexagon. And they have provided all of those different links out, no matter where the user wants to go. There's no happy path. There is just completing a task. And how are all the different ways that users can do that? And then when we think about something that works this on mobile, that structure doesn't necessarily change. The interface may change, and we may say, okay, on mobile, people may be doing, maybe their intentions are more XYZ versus ABC, but the entire customer intentions structure that has been created persists. How we deliver that structure based on the clues that the customer is giving us is what changes.
Thank you very much. So we have no more questions coming in. So thank you both for the fantastic session and taking the time to present here at Interact Conference. Tomorrow will already be our last day of Interact Global, and these sessions will be about leadership and business of design, and will be kicked off in the morning at 10 a.m. UK time from Angel Brown, Group Director Experience Strategy at Digitas Health, and she will talk about strategic design methods for business impact. We have come to the end of today's session, and thank you all for joining. See you tomorrow. And if you haven't signed up yet, there's still time to do. Go to Eventbrite, and see you all tomorrow. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.